You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Jill Waterman, the show's creative producer. I'm also host of our new monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. How do you begin to tell the story of a remote culture caught up in changes imposed by modern society? What methods can you use to get beyond a surface view to make compelling pictures that accurately reflect daily life? And how do you negotiate tense situations that may arise, particularly when people view themselves as a commodity rather than as a photographic subject? These are just a few of the questions we unpack with today's guest, documentary photographer Joshua Irwandi. Born and raised in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta, Joshua first visited the remote region of Asmat in 2013 on the invitation of a fellow photographer. Since that first visit, he has returned to the region numerous times for longer stays, even embedding as a staff member at the Asmat Museum. His resulting project, Not a Blank Canvas, is a long-term documentation of the Asmat people and the changes to their identity and landscape that have occurred in the past 10 years. Joshua's photographs from this project have received widespread acclaim, earning him a spot in the mentorship program of the photo agency Seven and as a National Geographic Explorer, among many other accolades. In 2021, his project was awarded with a National Geographic Society Storytelling Grant, and he was selected as a speaker for the National Geographic's Storytellers Summit. Joshua Irwandi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jill. Happy to be here.
Great talking with you. So, how did you decide to start a long-term project on the Asmat people? And when was the first time you visited there?
So I first came to Asmat in 2013. I just graduated from university at the time, and I was invited by Indonesian newspaper photographer Wisnu Widiantoro to come and visit. So I spent about 3 weeks, but I was immediately taken in by the place, the people. I was immediately fascinated by what I saw. And in 2014, I did my master's in photojournalism and documentary photography, and then decided to go back to Asmat for the major project. So I came the following year, and ever since, in one way or another, I have always been connected to the Asmat.
So you were born and raised in Jakarta, more than 2,000 miles from Asmat, and they're both in Indonesia, but Jakarta is the world's second largest city, and the Asmat region is an extremely remote part of Indonesia. What shifts in culture and infrastructure did you experience when you first arrived and during your earliest photo sessions there?
So I was in Asmat most of this year and last year as part of my National Geographic Society grant. And when I came in there, the place looked in many ways different to the one I visited 10 years ago. For example, in Agats, wooden walkways are almost non-existent. Most are replaced by concrete. So there are more telephone towers now and more to be built in the future. There are far more kiosks owned by non-Papuan people, and even more so sprawling throughout the city. And due to that too, there are far less Asmat people. I saw a report that in the 1970s, the Asmat people in Agats, then a village, and the neighboring villages, they dominate the area with few Toraja and Makassaris or Japanese families. Now, the tables have turned. Asmat people in Agats today are very much the minority.
Interesting. So let's go back to when you first arrived on that first visit. What kind of cultural shifts did you experience then coming from Jakarta, from the big city?
Like at the time, my visit wasn't necessarily an assignment per se. It was more just a visit. And when I saw Agats,
Which is the capital city?
of the Asmat Regency, of course, the difference are astronomical. I mean, like in Jakarta, this is one of the most populated and crowded cities on earth with millions of cars. And in Asmat, a car has never set foot in Asmat up until an ambulance was provided for COVID-19 in
Mm.
2020.
Wow.
And yeah, in terms of electricity at the time, like Jakarta, electricity is 24/7, whereas in Asmat, it was only available in the evening, first time I came. But I was sort of prepared for that. Like I knew that going off to places, especially places outside of the more developed islands like Java or Sumatra, you would have these sorts of challenges.
Right. What kind of advanced research or connecting work did you do to help establish a comfort level with locals and acclimate to situations you'd photograph?
So I've always had an amicable relationship with the Catholic Church in Asmat.
Hmm.
And that was established from the first time I came. And they have been supportive each time I come visit. I also connect with museums in America or Europe who hold Asmat art collection.
Aha.
Yeah, so even if someone thinks that I'm going to a remote area, and I always hear the word quote unquote primitive circling around when I work in Papua, Asmat has already had a wealth of history in the past century that only select few people follow or know about. So I don't pretend I have all the knowledge, but I guess it's easier to come and connect with the locals when you walk in like a new blank piece of book, wanting to learn rather than assume that you know about them already.
Right, right. So you go there looking to learn, but you also are using first world resources that are like museum professionals in America and Europe and stuff. That's really interesting.
Always, always. It's always a learning process for me. I mean, each time I come to Asmat.
So during your first visit, you were there for 3 weeks and you traveled around making pictures, and you ultimately found this early work unsatisfactory. What changes did you make to your approach or your process in subsequent visits to get more authentic and meaningful images?
So, admittedly, I guess I had a change in perspective in how I view my Asmat work. I came into Asmat first time, just like how most people would come in. I looked for the exotic. Let's admit that. But I realized that something is only called quote unquote exotic if we are so distant from it.
Right.
To me, it's almost like an imperialist word, and it feels that way for my early work in Asmat. And I feel that immediately that photographing or seeking the exotic, as it were, it tells no story.
Hmm. So let's differentiate, say, the exotic from daily life, from just sort of more mundane situations or occurrences. Is that a good reference point?
How do you mean?
Well, just someone washing clothes or eating dinner or tending to crops or something like that. That's sort of a daily life occurrence that I would imagine it would not be considered exotic.
Mm. So, in my subsequent visits to Asmat, instead of looking for the exotic and what have you, I try to photograph the daily lives of the Asmat under Indonesian governance.
Hmm.
And in terms of changes, I try to stay longer, a month or so at a time. So in that way, I could be a constant observer. But I guess there's a danger in that, like when you are too adaptable to one place, you end up following the very slow pace of that place.
Hmm.
And sooner than later, you are almost completely removed from everything that's going on in the world. I mean, I learned about the Ukraine war in Asmat. I couldn't imagine what it would be like.
Right. So I want to go back to differentiating between photographing daily life and photographing more exotic things, meaning like rituals or religious processions. How do your subjects respond to your making pictures? Are people welcoming when you're photographing their daily life? And when you're photographing the more exotic things, is there any difference in your relationship with your subjects?
I guess the people responded about the same. I mean, I think the camera is not a new device to them.
Hmm.
And especially with the availability of cell phones, they're now even taking images of their own, selfies and all.
Hmm.
So last year, I saw inside the Asmat Longhouse, the so-called jail. It's a traditional house where you have the elders sort of organizing any village affairs, anything that's going on regarding feasts, regarding anything. Yeah, it's their traditional house, so to speak.
So it's a center that people go to for any kind of familial gathering.
Yeah, exactly. Jail is always the center. Like if I were to document Asmat feasts, or also the place where if the Indonesian government sends a bunch of money and try to distribute it to the rest of the villages, then that's where they would discuss it. That's also at times where they distribute the money.
Mm-hmm. So the longhouse, does that exist in every village? And is that a central place to maybe begin documentation?
Beginning documentation for sure. Like if I walk into an Asmat village, then immediately I would go to the J. I would introduce myself in the J, and there I would give this so-called uang derma. It's translated as donation money, like an offering to the village and to receive me as a guest in the village. In my village in Sa and Air, for example, each of those villages have a J in their own space.
And that offering, that donation that you give, that's a very central, important part of showing respect.
Showing respect and showing that you are entering and being part of their midst.
Mm-hmm. So, what kind of language barriers have you encountered when photographing in Asmat? Are you able to speak local languages or dialects, or do you rely on other people to help translate?
So most Papuans today, they speak fluent Indonesian with a slight Eastern Indonesian dialect. So I come to learn to speak in their slangs as well. But there's not a whole lot of difference, at least for me. So it's pretty easy.
Mm.
But then, like for example, in the village Yakapis, some people don't speak Indonesian. But that was 8 years ago, and even then, it is still manageable to get something across. I can safely say that there is no place in Papua where the Indonesian language has not been introduced, for better or for worse. So for me, in a way, language is a form of occupation, if you think about it.
A form of occupation?
Like when I say occupation, meaning the narrative that goes with the independent movement for West Papua, and I try not to be too political, but they always feel that they are under Indonesian occupation.
Mm.
And if you think about it, the Indonesian rules over Papua or Asmat or anywhere else. So language is part of that.
I was thinking of occupation as in work. I get the difference. Interesting. So when you're photographing, how much communication is done non-verbally without language? And how effective is that in getting the subjects involved in what you want to photograph?
I think I always communicate verbally, just put it out there. But I feel that, especially in putting people at ease, then I would try to learn a few words. There was an American missionary who worked in Asmat about 20 years ago or so, who actually made a small dictionary of Asmat words, translations, and also the grammar. That I mean, it's almost reading a completely different alien language on its own. But so I still try to learn a few words, dirty words sometimes that are spoken in Asmat or in the villages of Sa and Air. I would speak the Kenok dialect.
Mm-hmm.
So I joke around. I mean, it's helpful. They connect instantly. So language is really the key to their hearts.
Mm-hmm. Their own language, the language that they understand.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you first start photographing in a new situation, how do you structure your time between observing the scene, interacting with people, and making pictures? Is there much of a warming up period before you pick up a camera?
So I guess I don't come around with my camera straight away. I walk around, I spend time with people, curious with what they do, I talk. But however long you want to spend doing that, you will be seen as a photographer anyway.
Right.
How I appear and how the Asmat people appear are infinitely different. And they know that you're there for what purpose. So, in that regard, I feel fairly secure about showing my camera.
But is there a slow period between showing it and actually picking it up and making pictures?
Certainly. Like sometimes I spend like a day or so, but then I won't be so shy about having my camera out on the second day.
Right. The second time you come around, you're already sort of a known entity.
So, for example, in other parts of Papua, like in the mountains, people see themselves as a commodity. Asmat too. So one time, the American priest there, Father Vince, told me a story of how we went up to the mountains in 1989 in Wamana, and he stayed at a family's honai. That's the name of the traditional home. If you saw the movie Dead Birds by Robert Gardner, that's where it's set. So we're talking about 1989 Papua here, and the concept of a town is too far fetched for a lot of people to imagine. So he stayed there for a few nights, and at the end, he wanted to make a picture of the family he was with. But the man in the family came and said, "No, you have to pay for our picture." So Father Vince was a little bewildered and said, "Well, what about the days I stay here? Can I contribute to that instead of paying for a picture?" And the guy simply said, "No, you can stay here for free. That's our culture. But you have to pay for the picture because we know you will take it out there and sell it for money."
Interesting. That's a really fascinating story.
Indeed. I recall a similar incident about 8 years ago in the village of Vieni when I was documenting an Asmat feast. And it seems like they didn't want to say it to me out loud, but I can see in their faces that they're not happy about a photographer suddenly turning up.
Right, right.
But I had somebody who came over and said that we don't want these pictures to be turned into CD-ROMs. I mean, who uses CD-ROMs these days?
But that's their contemporary reference. So when you're photographing, do you ever show pictures from your camera to the subjects you're photographing to increase their comfort level? Or can that be a hindrance?
Not so much of a hindrance. I mean, I do. I make prints. And really, in the village, if anyone needs photos, then they often come to me, which is a really good way to connect. And sometimes what you need is an invitation by the people for you to photograph them instead of you always imposing yourself wanting to make their pictures.
Right.
So that's a good way to connect. And they always keep the prints. This is an area where getting proper photography printed isn't so easy. So they would appreciate that.
Yeah. So do you bring a small printer with you to use?
I used to have a Canon selfie printer. And then more recently, there was a printer that's available in the area. And part of that is because the American priest, Father Vince, has his own stock of photo paper. And that helps. Like I could get the photo printed on that photo paper that way.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine that must be a huge resource.
Yeah, for sure.
So are there specific moments or situations you avoid photographing when you're wandering around the Asmat? Or are there pictures that may be problematic to make due to cultural sensitivities?
So the Asmat have an amazing way to mourn. And when someone dies, members of the family would be wailing out words in their dialect nonstop for days on end. So I was there when a famous Asmat carver, Herman Omordo, mourned the death of his wife, Agnes. When I heard the news that his wife died, I came to his house, but without a camera. I guess there is something in me that wants to document how it happens. I mean, it was a spectacle on its own. People were throwing off themselves onto the dead bodies, some rolled in the mud, grieving, and they come and go as they grieve for Agnes. But at the time, I did not have the heart, and I was there to comfort Herman Omordo, and that was it.
Right. You need to make priorities when encountering situations like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's about reading the room. Like, are you welcome here? And it is instinctive. Like, I'm a naturally shy person, so I don't go with guns blazing, all cameras. And usually I try to read the room before I decide, hey, I'm here to photograph. So,
Yeah, going back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago with situation you encountered where you were photographing and you felt that the people were not so happy you were taking pictures. What's your approach to that situation? Do you go up to the people and engage them in conversation to formally ask permission or work through any problems? Or do you just back off?
Most of the time, I back off. I mean, I try not to stir in anything worse than it already is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
for sure, it's like sometimes I do back off and let the thing run its course. And usually I just be present there and see how they feel about me being present there with my camera for a period of time.
Right.
And from then on, I mean, if people have acclimatized to my presence, then it would be easier to photograph. Like I recall in 2014 in the village of Ach, I needed to photograph a couple of policemen and a couple of Asmat people distributing gasoline to the village people. It is shady. I mean, like as soon as you come in there, you feel that something is a little off and no one is smiling. And people were lighting up with their jerry cans and carrying some coupon. And there was this guy who holds all the coupons. So I came to the place where they distribute the gasoline and I just stood there quietly snapping away some pictures because what they're doing is slightly illegal.
Mm.
But when they ask where I'm from, then I would say, well, I work for the museum in Agats and I'm just here to document these things. And the policeman especially just said, well, we don't want our pictures to be in your camera. But I think it was a big let off. I mean, in worse situation, then I wouldn't be so welcome. But I think just maintaining your presence and then be respectful and reading the room right, that would be the easiest way to go.
So, Joshua, the Asmat became infamous after Michael Rockefeller disappeared there during a 1961 expedition. And although it wasn't proven, it was suggested that he fell victim to headhunters. While headhunters are no longer a threat, there remains somewhat of an element of hostility that can flare up between different tribes and villages, which you've documented in some of your pictures. So, with that in mind, what, if any, safety precautions do you take when photographing tense situations like that?
Like I recall an advice by the Compass newspaper photo editor during my internship years in 2011 that in encountering tense situation, I should look to introduce myself to a nearby local, like somebody selling food or somebody with somewhat of an establishment, and then proceed from there. So if somebody was chasing me back for whatever reason, then I have somebody who would back me up. And obviously, it depends on each situation. And this is certainly not the only way to ensure safety in tense moments.
So, are there times when you've been photographing where you've felt that the presence of your camera is seen as hostile or an invasion of privacy?
I can immediately recall my camera being viewed as hostile. Again, like I'm a naturally shy person. So whether a camera is intrusive or not, I guess it depends on your instincts on reading the room or the field for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So in one of my pictures, there was a fight between the Asmat and the Kaigar because a few Kaigar people got drunk and then they ended up beating up an Asmat elder. And the following day, the Asmat people gathered around and they attacked the Kaigar settlement. At the time, it was almost like a David against Goliath fight. The Kaigar had no chance because they were only a very small group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And arrows were shot towards the Kaigar settlement. Mostly the Asmat people sort of attacking the Kaigar side. In that particular fight, I didn't wear safety gears or helmets or anything. I just had to be observant. Also, I don't want to be the center of attention, especially I was the only photographer during that time.
Right.
So it's about calculating risks, I guess, and just seeing like how likely are you to get in harm's way when you encounter situations like this.
So, before we go to a break, let's talk gear for a minute. Generally speaking, what's your go to gear when it comes to cameras and lenses?
So I have a Sony A1
Mm-hmm.
and I pair it with the Sigma 2470 art lens. So I want to give credit to Stephen Mercedes, who works at the B&H video chat, for recommending that. We went through hours of checking and testing the A1 until I was completely happy with it. And along with that, I have a Leica 28 and 35 mil that goes with an adapter to the Sony. It's a simple setup.
Oh, nice. And what about lighting gear or other accessories? Do you ever employ flash or lighting when you're working in Asmat?
So I have a couple of broncolor lights that I brought with me to Asmat. Father Fins provided me with a small studio where I could invite people to have their portraits made. So I guess that's about the only time so far where I use artificial lighting.
Hmm. Do you find there are situations where lighting a scene would be an imposition on the subjects?
Not so much. I always have the lights indoors. So in that respect, if people were already agreeing to come to the studio, I would assume that the lighting isn't a problem. They're already comfortable with why they're there. What are we going to do?
Hmm.
So yeah.
So, do you ever encounter issues with lack of power or connectivity when you're working with the Asmat and in remote situations? If so, what do you do to remedy that?
Well, I mean, there is only 3 hours of electricity each night in Asmat.
Mm,
So batteries are gold in places like that. I mean, power bank chargers and really timing your charging time as efficiently as possible. It's a little ridiculous. I mean, I also stock gasoline for the generator that's already set up there. So no gasoline
mm,
means no electricity.
right. So, the 3 hours of electricity, how does that time period fall?
So that would be from, like, say, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Is there competition for the electricity or are there issues with power surges due to that short time span?
No, I mean, it's a pretty simple setup. They have a generator at the back, and you just fill in your jerry can, and then you pour in whatever 12 liters of gas. Would last you about 2 or 3 days, depending how much you use the electricity. And more recently, I have better control of the generator. So I just turn it on and off depending on when I need. And like, if I don't feel like I need a generator, then I don't turn it on, which is a little sad. That's why I said at the beginning, you can be so removed from everything, because when you decide that you don't own electricity, that means you won't be connecting with anybody.
Right. You mentioned that local people now have cell phones and can take their own selfies and things like that. When did you see that begin? When you first came to Asmat, were there cell phones, or is that something that's only happened since your arrival?
Since my arrival, I think in Indonesia, maybe at the beginning of 2000s,
Right.
and in Asmat, at least the foreigners would have the cell phones, but then the Asmat people, I think, have only started buying phones, especially cheap phones, maybe in the last 7 to 8 years. And like, that speed of progress, if you like, is so accelerated. Suddenly they have smartphones,
Yeah.
and they update everything on Facebook, and they start adding me on Facebook, or I set up the Facebook page for the Asmat Museum of Culture and Progress in Agats, and Asmat people could actually see online. Anyway, it's almost hilarious. I mean, somebody tried to put an NFT of a picture in in, in Asmat.
Wow. It's revolutionary.
Indeed. I mean, like, any place where the internet touches, that's easily going to be part of the global conversation.
Right. Yeah. So, what about heat and humidity within Asmat? Are there procedures that you follow to help avoid issues with that or damage to your gear or your images when you're there for an extended period of time?
I mean, I think as I age, the heat and humidity are real killers. It's ridiculous these days. I do have like a little thing that tells you the humidity and temperature. So it could go up to 105 or 110 Fahrenheit during the day.
Ooh, wow.
So, like you would just be sitting there doing nothing, and suddenly you have like a wet t shirt. So I find the need to constantly hydrate. And in terms of my gears, that's pretty simple. I have a couple of dry boxes
Mm,
that I brought with me with packs of rechargeable silica gels.
mm-hmm,
And I have the loose silica gels as well. I could put them on a stove and they would turn from pink back to blue, and then put it on a sock.
mm-hmm.
And that would help with maintaining your gear to not developing mold or anything.
Right. So do you find those dry boxes to be essential when you're working in Asmat?
Absolutely. I mean, the humidity is 90%.
So it's 105 and 110 with 90% humidity. Yikes. That's
Yeah.
oppressive.
It's not an easy life, but sometimes these are the things we have to go through for a story, right? I mean,
Exactly. Okay, this seems like a perfect time for us to take a little breather. When we return, we'll have more with Joshua Irwandi and his documentation in the region of Asmat. I hope you're enjoying this chat for my monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about the episode, so please leave us a rating and post a review on Apple Podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode of Picturing World Cultures, which drops Thursday, March 7th. Okay, we are back and speaking with Joshua Irwandi about his documentation of the Asmat people of Indonesia. Joshua, as part of your documentation of the Asmat, you embedded as a staff member at the Asmat Museum. Were there discoveries you made from the museum's collection that gave you new insights into the people, or that you were able to incorporate in pictures?
I wish there is a simple way to answer that. I've been to almost every museum that exhibits Asmat art, both in Europe and America.
Mm,
And obviously, I've seen the museum in Asmat, the local museum in Asmat, and seen further in Asmat villages. The contrast is quite extraordinary. I mean, say a spirit mask from a Pokemon feast, let's say the Metropolitan Museum.
mm-hmm.
As you can imagine, the practice of handling collections in museums in the West, following a strict standardized protocol, it's impeccable. They save every bit of sago leaf that's deteriorating. In comparison, in Asmat, in the villages, the very objects the museum conservators try to save are still very much in use for feasts and everything today. So, what's this telling me is that material culture and understanding is important. So, I try to show that in my images at times, not to show exoticism, but to show that these objects play an important role as part of their identity. Ironically, the Asmat people don't commonly know where they would find their art collections abroad. Like very few Asmat people have had the privilege to go and look at their own art in a Western setting.
Right. So basically, what you're talking about is getting down to the elemental level of documenting the basics.
Yeah, pretty much that.
Another big connection you have within Asmat is an American missionary who's lived among the Asmat since the late 1970s. What kind of resources has he provided or insights into the local culture?
So, Father Vincent Cole was the last American Roman Catholic priest in Papua. He served for 44 years before he retired last Christmas.
Oh, really? He's no longer there.
Yeah, he just left just a few months ago, in fact. So, in terms of resources, I mean, he provided everything. I had a guest house where I could stay in, and certainly sort of connect me with the people, pointed out different sets of people that would at least be interested in what I'm doing, and vice versa. Yeah, Father Vince, as I know him,
Mm-hmm.
is an outlier in his own right. He he documented the songs of Asmat ritual feasts,
Mm.
tried to understand the Asmat culture, embracing the culture into every decision making he needed to make. So, for example, in 2004, he built a church that resembles an Asmat longhouse, the jail, without any funding, or as far as I understand it, that to this day is cherished by the villagers in Zion Air, the villages he served in and where I am based.
Mm.
So in that church, everyone sits cross legged on the floor with the altar in the center of the room. He also tries to marry Catholic celebrations with those of the Asmat. So Easter is celebrated in the way the Pokemon feast is celebrated, and Christmas is celebrated in the way of the Jimmy Peer feast.
So are those Asmat feasts timed to the same season as, Western Easter and Christmas? Is it a matter of timing that brings them together?
No, I mean, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it comes to a similar time, but when I say that he marries the celebrations, it's more in the actual ritual itself. Like, for example,
Ah,
last Christmas, it's celebrated in the way of the Jimmy Peer feast. The item, the object here, is basically a mat that the women in the village make for about a month. In that peer mat, where usually you have images or symbols of animals or plants, sago, whatever, that usually are showcased in an actual Jimmy Peer feast. Now, for Christmas, you always have the image of Mother Mary giving birth to Jesus. So it's pretty graphic too, if you look at it. I mean, they actually weave the peer mat and they added an image of Mary and Jesus underneath with the stars and also with blood that comes out.
so basically it's incorporating Christian iconography in the existing cultural handicrafts or the things that are made within the Asmat culture.
Yeah, correct. In this process, they call inculturation. That's the whole spiel of Father Vince's involvement
Mm.
with the Asmat. Whether we like it or not, I think he is the only priest that I know who does this. That's why my project in Asmat is called Not a Blank Canvas, because like Asmat is not a place where you could come in and then stamp your authority, whether it be in government or in religion, and expect Asmat to follow it by the book.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own way of thinking, and what's sad to see is that if some religious group come in and they want to try to change or get rid of the existing culture that's already there in the first place.
Right. So it sounds like this priest, Father Vincent, basically came in and understood and learned the existing culture first in a way to connect with the people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now that he's retired and he's no longer there, is there a successor? Is there any plan in place for the future, or is it just a void?
Well, I would say this. I think there is hope for inculturation to be continued, but I think it would present a challenge, especially for the existing priests there who may not have an interest or want to have an understanding of how the culture works.
Mm-hmm. So I know that ceremonial feasts and rituals have always been an important part of Asmat culture. How has that changed in the recent past since you've been there? Has there been a shrinking of the significance or a change from the traditions that existed to more modern or more Western influenced rituals?
Feasts are central to Asmat life and cosmology.
Hmm.
It's a tradition that has sustained itself until today. But money has arguably replaced the sanctity, if you like, of the Asmat ritual feasts. So these days, Asmat villages holding down a feast would send out invitations to government officials who would then come with sacks of rice, boxes of instant noodles,
Hmm.
coffee, money. So whether we like it or not, these are the incentives for the Asmat people to run the show.
Hmm.
So Asmat feasts are also something that's celebrated for months on end. And in between, sometimes there are Indonesian government or military projects where Asmat people are employed to work on a bridge or on a road or something like that. So that created delays to reach the final day of the feast. And these delays often make feasts discontinued. For example, According to local beliefs, there are consequences from this. So in the village of Sona, one time in 2016, the village head, Herman Eyre, associated three deaths of Soiwir, or the singer drummers, to the delays caused by the projects.
Did you say deaths?
Yeah, because of the delays caused by the projects. So three people died, the singer and drummers, who were at the time preparing for the Pokman feast. And Herman Eyre theorized that those delays caused their deaths because like they stray away from the tradition, the natural way of doing things.
So what it sounds like is that the traditional feasts and the way that the culture has existed is being co-opted by progress or contemporary culture.
Yeah. The contemporary progress has interfered with the natural way of holding a feast, for example.
So the feasts that you're talking about, what kind of duration are they?
It depends. Most last for months. And again, this is a rough guess. So the feast starts from when one of the elders receive a message, a dream from the ancestor that they have to hold a feast.
Aha. So they're not etched in the calendar. They come from a supernatural place.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like it's not Christmas, 25th of December every year. Now it's more like when they have like a sort of communication, a negotiation, if you like, with the ancestor spirits. Okay, well, right now we are going to do a feast and this is what you have to do and this is how you organize it.
Wow.
And it's amazing because in that case, he would then discuss it with the rest of the elders who would then spread the word and have the rest of the village go to the rainforest and collect everything that's needed for the feast. Sago leaves and
How long of a process would that be between the initial impetus for the feast and it actually starting? That's probably one of the reasons why they last for months.
yeah, so the feast starts really when the dream comes. For example, the Pokman feast. It would be at the beginning where the dream came and then the elder had to organize for the rest of the village. They would then gather all the materials, sago leaves, and all kinds of plants to make masks. And masks, like the spirit masks that perhaps you have seen in some of my images, could take up to a month to weave.
Wow.
And it would be kept in each hearth in the jail, in the longhouse. And they would be kept out of sight from women and children because for the Asmat longhouse, it's only for men.
Aha.
It's their right to weave and later on the final day to paint the spirit mask. Yeah, that would say something between 5 to 6 months at least if there are no delays.
And then once everything is ready to move from the preparation stage to the active stage, how long is the active or performative stage of the feast?
Yeah, that's the part where people are actually being invited. So I would say about 4 or 5 days of complete ritual. So for the Folkman feast, they set a day where they bring in all the wood from the forest to construct another set of longhouse at the front of their own longhouse. Select people would wear the spirit masks and it would be as if like an ancestor spirit come to be among them. So whoever is inside is in a state of trance, dancing all night, and people would mourn and wail as if the spirit of their ancestor has come back to be among them, to be in the village with them again. And you think that, okay, well, maybe this is for show, or maybe this is just somebody with some woven leafy mask coming around. But no, I mean, at the end of that feast, for example, I saw a whole bunch of people crying. At the end, there was a simple ceremony where the spirit masks are all lined up and they jump over a block of sago that symbolizes that the spirits have gone back to the forest. And people were actually crying and weeping and wailing, knowing that their ancestor has gone back. The emotion is very real when you are in the middle of it.
What happens after the feast ends? Is there a sort of extended emotional period, or does it just dissipate right away once the feast ends?
Once the feast ends, they would distribute this armband with cassowary feather attached to it.
Hmm.
I mean, this is a little complicated to explain, but once you get the armband, like a spirit from another person is now with you, and therefore your name has changed from your original name to your new spirit name. So, for example, the simplest way to explain this maybe is that one of the elders at the time, Rufus Isomor, was given this armband, which is called Kon, by the way, Kon.
Hmm.
The spirit on his Kon is called Sati. And from that day on forward, his name would be known as Rufus Sati. So it's like exchanges between family.
Okay.
And exchanges is an important part of that too. At the end of the feast, people would be trading axes, seashells, and a whole bunch of tools that people can trade, or something of value that people trade between one another.
And that signifies the ending of the feast and the connection between people.
Largely, yes.
Mm. You've been able to photograph the active, performative part of these feasts, correct?
Mhm.
So, are there parts that you're prohibited from photographing? How do you approach photographing in that kind of very spiritual, ceremonial situation?
This is interesting because, in general, Asmat feast is a sacred ritual
Mm-hmm.
in which, like they respect everything and everything has to be intact. That's probably the reason why there's one guy who didn't want the images from that particular feast in the village of Yeni that I told you about in CD-ROMs. You could
Mm-hmm.
argue that maybe he didn't want that to be in CD-ROMs because it's sacred, but it could also be because he didn't want for me to get some kind of monetary gain from that.
Right.
But in terms of parts of the feast that's, unphotographable, I was pretty free to go. I do remember in the last Pokemon feast, on the final day of the feast, they would have something that's called Manmar. So Manmar is basically like a basket that symbolizes an orphan child. And the Manmar would be taken away to the forest at about 4 in the morning. And I saw that. They actually get somebody to wear the Manmar, and the Manmar went off on a fiber boat, and the person was just sort of hiding in the forest on the opposite side of the river. And I had asked if it was possible for me to come with the Manmar in that fiber boat so that I could photograph him when he was getting ready or when he was about to come back to the village. Because, the normal course of way is that people would be paddling in their dugout canoes to the opposite side of the river, fetch the Manmar into the canoe and back to the village. And that's the part where women and children and everyone in the village would gather around and witness the Manmar coming from the opposite side of the river back to the village. Yeah, I had wanted to photograph that Manmar as it was from when he was at the other side of the river. But the elders did not agree to that, which I respect. The reason is because the Manmar itself is almost like a mythical entity on its own. And they didn't want the women and children to look at it suddenly like, hey, why is there a photographer there? So they really want to try to keep it pure and intact for the villagers to see.
Even though it was public for the villagers to see in real life, they didn't want an image to be left.
Yeah, well, they didn't want a photographer standing next to the Manmar.
Mm-hmm.
And the children, when they're young, they'd be looking at it like, what joke is this? Children is an important part of this too.
Interesting. And you mentioned that the preparation for this feast, that women are not allowed in the longhouse. Is there a separate building or structure where women gather?
No, women would be in their homes or in the forest gathering sago and whatnot. And I mean, back in the days of headhunting, if you like, the roles of women and men were clear. Both would be hunting and gathering food, but men goes to war and women stay back at home. And sometimes one or two would come to the battle as well. But right now, with headhunting non-existent in Asmat, the men's role of being the headhunter, that's no longer there anymore.
So it's diminished their value or their potency.
Yeah. So they have like less things to do. So if you walk into an Asmat village, what you see are women still working away and still gathering food and gathering sago and everything and provide for the family. I mean, these are strong women. But then some of the Asmat men, you just see them sitting there doing nothing, smoking cigarettes. And why?
Mm, hmm.
Because what happens right now is that the Indonesian government distributes pots and pots of money, and they come in different names, and the Asmat people would just wait for those money to come to the village.
Mm,
So it creates this dependency between the Asmat people and the Indonesian government.
hmm. So there's no alternative kind of work, farming or agriculture, raising animals that the men would do in place of their old rituals of headhunting.
Yeah, no, Asmat are subsistent hunter gatherers, and it's not natural for them to farm. I
Mm,
mean, I know that there are several attempts of this being put in place. You know, somebody tried to farm crabs one time
mm,
and wild boars as well. They tried to farm the pigs,
hmm.
but it never really got anywhere as far as
Mm,
I've known. I mean, somebody is now trying to have oranges, like a little orange garden, but that's not really
hmm.
farming. That's just keeping a garden and reap off it once in a while.
Hmm. So I want to switch to a question about a term that you use in some of your images. You use the term transmigrant in the captions for some images. Can you elaborate on that term and its relevance within Asmat culture?
So when I say transmigrants, there is no particular transmigration program to Asmat, but migrants from other parts of Indonesia, or in this case, I would call them foreigners. They are basically
Mm-hmm.
people from other islands in Indonesia, such as Bugis, Buton, or Makassar, who moved from their origins to basically all over Papua, Asmat included.
Mm-hmm.
So they started to open up businesses and kiosks, and soon enough, the area they occupy become gentrified. The Asmat people with no real access to good healthcare, education, understanding of the economy are then easily pushed further away. And I've already seen that since the first time I came. In Agats or Ach, for example, two different towns, the foreigners occupy the most busy part of the town. That's what people living outside of that zone.
Mm.
And the distinction is in the hair. The Papuans call the foreigners rambut lurus, straight hairs, and the Papuans have the rambut keriting, curly hairs.
Interesting. So have you documented much of that change of the transmigrants coming in?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, that's part of my documentation. And what I've seen, and it's quite sad, is that the foreigners have always been quite separate from the Asmat.
Mm.
And as a result, the Asmat people are treated as second class. So I sense
Mm-hmm.
that there is like a deep underlying separation between the groups. And like anywhere, these tensions can flare up when provoked. But for the foreigners, especially in recent generations, the Asmat land could feel as much their own as it is for the Asmat. Like they have lived their entire lives there, they were born there. So whose land is it? To what extent can someone claim their land, their land?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. So before we wrap up, I want to talk about another picture you took that became hugely significant. During the COVID crisis, you gained access to photograph in the COVID-19 ward in Jakarta, and your image of a corpse on a hospital bed became a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize in breaking news. It also went viral on Instagram, and it sparked violent reactions and became the focus of questions about journalistic truth and ethics. Has this situation changed the way you think about subjects that you choose to photograph and the way you work?
Um, well, it hasn't changed the way I approach a story or people I choose to photograph. But at the very least, I try to be more careful about images I choose to share with the public, especially on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
So some images are more triggering than others, and we have to be mindful of that. Like, we don't want to provide a clickbait.
Right.
The caption is extremely important. especially on what you want to say about the image you just shared. Because images can be stolen, distorted, recontextualized in a myriad different ways. So when the image went viral, the caption that I wrote together with my mentor, a Dutch photographer, Geert van Kesteren, it was crucial.
Hmm.
Um, like if we didn't spend time on that and making sure of the message that we want to send to the public, we may have completely different reaction. While I can overthink about this, sadly, there's a much bigger problem at hand. Sharing difficult images on social media can result in a couple of ways. People can choose to believe and act on it, or they could ignore it
Hmm.
or attack it and call it fake news. So you realize then that
Right.
the only reality that people want to believe in is the reality they choose for themselves. What is then the function of
Hmm.
storytellers? Are we simply content creators? Are there ethics and responsibilities to follow? How does our work stand in the stream of information and misinformation out there?
Hmm.
Is there place for photojournalism? I think it's something the rest of us should ponder upon.
Well, it's certainly something that's going to take on more and more significance in the days to come with AI and all those questions coming up.
Hmm.
So in September 2022, you were selected as a co-leader of National Geographic's Indonesia Explorers Hub, which is a community of sharing and collaboration for National Geographic explorers and grantees of Indonesian heritage. Has being part of this community given you fresh insights to incorporate in documenting the Asmat or other aspects of Indonesian culture?
Most certainly. I mean, I think while documenting the Asmat is an independent work on its own, I love connecting with other explorers, seeing their varied disciplines and diverse ways of working, different angles. For me, at least, it offers much of a fresh perspective, if you like. And holding this role, I also hope for it to be as inclusive as possible. Like, I think the Explorers Hub was only for explorers, but I sort of took the initiative that grantees, like for example, the Nat Geo COVID-19 grant recipients, can also be part of it. And the point is, we are not competitors. If we truly believe that our ultimate job as a storyteller is to tell each of our stories.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on, Joshua. And I look forward to seeing more of your stories in the future. Thanks so much for sharing this story with us about your work in Asmat and your knowledge of the people and your experiences making pictures there. But before we go, I'd like to end with a short visual questionnaire inspired by the TV show Inside the Actors Studio. It's a brief list of questions with one-sentence answers. So, Joshua Irwandi, with all things being equal, what's your preference, black and white or color?
Color, for sure. I always identify myself as a color photographer.
Figured as much. Which image orientation do you gravitate to more often, horizontal or vertical or square?
Horizontal, for sure.
And what's your lens preference, prime or zoom?
Prime, if I can help it, but I don't mind using zoom.
And if you could only carry one lens, which would it be?
It would be the 35 millimeter prime, but I don't have it at the moment. So we'll see.
It's on your wish list.
It's on my wish list as well in B&H checkout.
What's the most important thing you look for at the instant when you click the shutter?
Where the light comes from and the expression of the person, if there is one.
And what one photographer, living or dead, has influenced your work the most?
I have to say, and I only have one answer to this, Susan Meiseles.
Great answer. Other than photography, what profession or craft would you most like to explore?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, thinking about multiverse now in another parallel universe, I would be a doctor or a leather maker.
Mm,
But in the immediate reality, I've always been fascinated by bookmaking. So we'll see to that.
interesting. All right. Leather making and bookmaking, I can see the connection there for sure. Finally, in a single word, what is your biggest motivation for making pictures?
I want to make memories. Memory, in a single word, memory.
That's great. Yeah. So, are there projects you're currently working on or upcoming exhibits, events, or picture stories in the works?
Well, I'm still working on my Asmat grant project while also keeping an eye on the building of Nusantara, the new capital city.
And where can listeners find out more about you and your work? Your website, social media?
Well, my work can be seen at joshuairwandi.com, while I can also be reached via Instagram at Josh Irwandi.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out for more of your pictures. Thanks again for speaking with me, Joshua, and introducing us to your work. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this show, we'd love to hear about it. Pull up this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure the subscribe button is clicked for automatic updates about every episode release. While you're there, please leave us a comment. We're waiting for your feedback. You can also find us and drop us a line on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with show notes. And if you're a fan of social media, please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast Group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast's creative producer and host of this series. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer for this episode is Jeremy Weiss, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.